We know, of course, that in telecommunication, you have personal data, and they might, and I even expect them to train models on this kind of data, because obviously if we help them improve the service. But as long as when they train this kind of model, for me, it still belongs to the user. I mean, belongs to the user not really belongs to in a term of property, but at least in terms of sensitivity of the data, which means that to me, a telecommunication company can do these kind of things, but it has to consider that the model that's been trained will have the same level of privacy as the data themselves of my call logs, for example. The main difference is that if they have enough data to train this algorithm, they can at some point assume that it does not contain any personal information. And that's also might be interesting.
Frédéric Grelot, thank you so much for your time today. You are the CEO of GLIMPS in Canada. We've met a few times since you moved from France to Canada. But first and foremost, I know you've been extremely busy with not just your work, but a lot of gala events that you're also part of. You're both organizing and being celebrated at gala events. All this craziness, how are you doing?
I'm going fine. Yeah, very fine. Very busy in Toronto. I've been here for less than 1 year, actually, something like 8 months now, as the CEO of GLIMPS Canada. So the first subsidiary of our company, GLIMPS. And very busy with all those events. A few days ago, it was the French Tech Toronto Summit, where we celebrated French tech and French excellence in this field. And I'm part of French Tech, so lots of work doing that. And this week will be about the Relève ON Gala from the Club Canadien. So a Francophone speaking association celebrating the excellence, we'll say, in the French-speaking community in Ontario.
Yeah, wonderful. And it's great to see that you're so engaged and so active in all these communities, which is awesome. For people that are new to GLIMPS, I mean, a lot of the conversations that we're having on this series are about cybersecurity. So definitely more than a few people will be watching us right now that understand a decent level of what cybersecurity is about, but they might be newer to GLIMPS. And GLIMPS stands out by using your AI and deep learning tools and going into code conceptualization to really figure out where are those really well hidden attacks. Now, for people that have no clue what we're talking about, help us understand code conceptualization to go after malware. What is it?
Yeah, code conceptualization is an AI engine that we developed at GLIMPS that allows us, I would say, to understand computer code and create what we call concepts of this code, so transform a code into a concept. And then at GLIMPS, we work on malware analysis and investigation. So our goal, of course, is to detect malwares, to detect variants and new malwares, and to give insight to security teams about what they are, what they do, how they should protect themselves. And code conceptualizations helps us in the fact that when we see a new file that we don't know anything about, we try to extract everywhere where there might be some malicious spaces, and we'll transform them into those concepts. And then we have databases of what we call the malicious concepts, and we'll see, okay, in this file there are some concepts. Like I would say, what will be a concept? It might be, for example, the encryption loop of Logbit ransomware, for example. But it's very vague when you see that as a concept, which is very interesting because we'll look into this concept and see, oh, this code here, we don't know about it. There is no signature associated with it because the attacker have changed the code, for example. But we know that concept, and that is the encryption loop of the Logbit ransomware. So we are able to say, okay, this code here is an unknown malware. There's no signature attached to it, but still, it contains those malicious concepts of code that we know are related to log-based ransomware. And so we know about both detection and then investigation by also, I mean, there are lots of other things in the product that allows us to add, to extract additional information, IOCs and so on, and everything you can imagine basically about the malware that we are analyzing at the time. I mean, if you had an analyst who was able to reverse engineer code very quickly, of course, because we do that in a few seconds, and that will also have a knowledge of lots of codes. Because I mean, I'm a reverse engineer. I was a reverse engineer, and I was able to recognize, okay, I know this code or the concept with this code, but I can't contain that many concepts at the end. And in our case, we are able to automate that with AI and to have, I mean, our database of concept codes is 1 billion different concept codes, of which something like 50 million malicious concept codes. So that's quite a lot to remember. And yeah, that's how we detect and analyze malware.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, you guys are really like on that crux where cybersecurity and AI come together. And do you know, AI, at the end of the day, it is all built on the hygiene, the quality, and the amount of data that's available. And you know, without data, there's really nothing you can do with AI. And then that brought you to ask a really interesting question when you were moderating a panel at the gala for Le French Tech.
French Tech, yeah.
Yeah. In Toronto last week. Where you asked very smart leaders of different organizations that all were passionate about data and AI, and some also about cybersecurity. You asked the question, so who owns the data really, and who has the responsibility, or who will allow you to use data for all these things? And there wasn't a clear answer to that. So I want to ask you, like, what are you know, as a moderator, you're not really allowed to answer your own question. So I want to give you the option to give your thoughts on that, because you see where you need data to actually keep, you know, organizations safe. But, you know, data can be personal data. Data can be owned by a company. It might not always be clear. You know, we always joke in cybersecurity that not a single user understands the concept of a shared responsibility. And so it's almost a question of, is there a shared ownership of data at some point? So what are your thoughts about that very difficult line between this is client-owned data, this is organization-owned data, and what you are allowed to do with either?
Yeah, that's. I mean, that was really the goal of my question. Of course, I was very. I was more comfortable last week moderating the panel and asking this question than answering it now. But I try anyway, because, I mean, obviously the answer is really not simple.
Yeah.
When we train model on data, if it's personal data, can we assume that these data? That the model does not reflect those personal data. That's already a first point, very critical one. Actually, we know it's not new that you can, from a model, sometimes extract its training data sets, which means that you can retrieve those personal data. So that's very important. I mean, for companies to, when we use those data, to know, okay, do we have some personal data in those files? And when we train our model, will it reflect those personal data? For example, if your model is a classifier, you train it on personal data. It will, of course, contain some part of those data, but the output is just 0 or 1. So it's very complicated to take out those data. So you can consider that the model itself is not sensitive and does not contain those personal data. If you train an LLM, for example, like a chatbot, we know that you can ask chatbots to, give the first chapter of the first book of Harry Potter. I encourage you to do that. You will be very surprised by what happens. Some kind of bug, I would say, on ChatGPT. It's an expected outcome, but yeah, we see that there are some guardrails on ChatGPT because the model itself is completely able to give the answer. This model is it linked to those copyrighted data? It's really a critical matter. And even though when I said you just train a classifier, imagine you train, I don't know, some kind of military device that you want to train on tracking radar signatures, things like that, and you embed that in some missile or anything that you will put on the field. And this model that you will put in this position contains the data it's been trained on. So if you train it on classified data like radar signatures, this kind of thing, that means that you're putting this thing into the field. Just like 20 or 30 days ago when you had a GPS radio, if it were lost on the field, that means that anybody will be able to use the GPS signal, which was not public. So there were some encryption devices inside and so on. So we have exactly the same problem. So by saying that, I don't really answer your question. Whose data is it? But I would say, there was someone from a telecommunication company on the panel. We know, of course, that in telecommunication you have personal data, which are, calls, for example, the sound of the calls itself, but it's only transits. In theory, on their networks, but we know that they will keep records of who called who for how many times. At least for billing, for example. And these, of course, are personal data. And they might, and I even expect them to train models on this kind of data, because obviously, if we help them improve the service.
Yes.
But as long as when they train this kind of model, for me, it still belongs to the user. Belongs to the user not really belongs to in a term of property, but at least in terms of sensitivity of the data, which means that to me, a telecommunication company can do these kind of things, but it has to consider that the model that's been trained will have the same level of privacy as the data themselves of my call log, for example. The main difference is that if they have enough data to train this algorithm, they can at some point assume that it does not contain any personal information. And that's also might be interesting. And there was another person who works in AI, in particular in the health sector, that mentioned something that's very interesting. They work with hospitals, and they want to train models on data from those hospitals. That's in Spain, explained. And there is a strong regulation on health data, of course, in particular in Spain. And the fact is that data that are within one hospital are not allowed to leave the hospital, which means that if you train an algorithm on those data, you cannot take this algorithm out of the hospital. Unfortunately, if you want to train models, efficient models, the data from only one hospital is not enough. So you have to merge data from all hospitals, but you cannot do that. And I really want to keep this discussion with him in the future, because there are some techniques that are very hard to implement in reality, that can allow you to have some kind of central training manager that will delegate training to several workers, we'll say, for example, one per hospital, that will do part of the training, and that will take the results of this training out in the manager. And you can do like this, some kind of distributed training, where you will try, and that's where I really want to dig the matter with him, because the goal would be to be able, just as I said, if you're a telecommunication company and you train your model on enough data, it will not contain any specific data of any specific user. Yeah. So I'd like to know if it's possible. I think they'll find a way to do that, to have small enough increment of training on each of those hospitals, so there is no specific sensitive information in this increment. You merge all of them, so you have a first version of your model. You then share it to all the hospitals. You do another increment, you merge them, you share them, and by doing that, this back and forth between the manager and the hospitals, for example, I think you will be able to train this algorithm with enough data, which is what you want at the beginning, but while ensuring that at no point you took sensitive data from any of those hospitals. That's a real challenge, but I think that's part of one solution because it really solves this matter for them.
Yeah. What you're talking about is really understanding a new way of thinking in a specific industry and working from the very start with thinking about how can you do this in a way that it's not only safe from what we know attackers are doing today, but also that from an ethical and a legal perspective, the right precautions are taken. So I want to ask you this: what companies like GLIMPS and other, new generation AI-born, I'm going to call it cybersecurity organizations, what role can we play in order to be that moderator or that proactive consultant and move away from, these attacks are happening, let's try and fix those problems for you, but play that role of let's build towards a technology future that is just proactively more strong, more safe, more ethical. What's the role that you think companies like GLIMPS can or should play? Do you have an example that comes to mind?
Yes, if we take into account what we discussed about privacy, especially, there is a strong difference between a startup that just starts its activity and, say, big groups. I won't give names, but big cybersecurity companies that exist, that have been here for a long time. That those companies, they have huge amounts of data, and they always worked with those data, and they always work with the principle that, many antiviruses, for example, free antiviruses, especially, they will be free. Okay, they're free, but why are they free? Because they will use your data to improve their algorithms, which means that as soon as they detect something somewhere, they will take it back to their cloud and analyze it in their cloud. So they have this huge amounts of data. And when you install it, you check the box that allows them to do that. In our case, we don't have that. You start an AI cybersecurity company today, you have zero data, which means that we have to think different. And what we try to do at GLIMPS, we started with this idea that we won't ever use data from our clients. Maybe that's a huge mistake, but I definitely think that that's a huge advantage, because we can ensure our users that with us, their data are safe. And how can we do that? Because of two things. The first one is that there are lots of already publicly shared data on the web, so we can use that. But that's not as many data as what those companies have, so we still have one problem. Okay, we have fewer data, but we've been working lately on using pre-trained model like LLMs for malware detections, and we can give the link about on those works if you're interested. And for these detection technologies, we use pre-trained algorithms, pre-trained AI engines. I won't go into the details of what is pre-training, what is fine-tuning, and this kind of thing, but that's a real revolution in AI in those last few years, is that we have lots of pre-trained model. So that allows us to say, okay, we have fewer data, but we have the capacity of not starting from scratch when we do detection, but we start from pre-trained model, and we will improve it by bringing it what it needs to become a malware detector, for example. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we try to do at GLIMPS. Did you get that, Jasper?
I got it.